Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley, a pair whose relationship still sparks debate centuries later. Was it a lifelong love, or a toxic bond of painful attachment? Was the Queen truly a virgin, or did their union bring secret children into the world? And if Dudley was her greatest love, why did he never become her husband? Let's uncover the truth together in this video. Elizabeth and Robert had known each other since childhood. We don't know when they first met each other, though some suggest Dudley was part of her half-brother Edward's household. Robert later mentioned that they had first become friends before Elizabeth was 8 years old. There was only a year between them. Robert was born in 1532, and Elizabeth in 1533. So it is not surprising that a childhood friendship could grow between them. We have very little information about that time. Elizabeth, as you remember, was considered a bastard. Robert was only the fifth son of John Dudley, a courtier who was still building his career at the court of Henry VIII. Nothing that would inspire ambassadors to write reports, and Elizabeth herself rarely liked to recall her childhood. Everything changed after the death of Henry VIII. During the reign of Edward VI, Robert's father John became the most powerful man in England. He led the Privy Council and controlled the young king. You may remember him if you watched my video about the Grey sisters. He was the father-in-law of Lady Jane Grey, arranging her marriage to Guildford Dudley, Robert's own brother. In films and books, we often see the idea that Elizabeth and Robert fell in love as teenagers. But in reality, there is no evidence that they were romantically attached to each other at that age. Most likely they lived their lives according to their rank, and only met occasionally at court. What we do know is that Robert's tutor, Roger Ascham, was also the tutor of young Elizabeth. And we also know that Robert's father helped Elizabeth claim the inheritance she was owed from Henry VIII, which had not been paid to her. Another argument against the idea of a teenage romance is the fact that Robert married at 18. In 1550, he wed Amy Robsart, the only daughter of a wealthy Norfolk landowner. It was considered a love match, since he had met her a year earlier during a visit there. So when you see the film Elizabeth, from which I used some scenes in this video, and Elizabeth acts shocked that Robert is married, remember, that is pure invention. The marriage was no secret. Even King Edward himself attended the wedding. At the same time, Elizabeth was facing her own challenges. She had to fend off the very persistent attention of Thomas Seymour, who wished to marry her and clearly wanted much more. She lived in the household of Seymour and Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's last wife. With her natural diplomacy, Elizabeth managed to escape that scandal, and this would be only the first of many she would survive in her lifetime. Robert Dudley soon began an active career. He was knighted and became a Member of Parliament, but the death of Edward changed everything. If you remember the story of Jane Grey, you know that the ambitions of Robert's father led to disaster. Both he, his daughter-in-law Jane, and his son Guildford Dudley were executed. It is remarkable that in this situation, the Dudley family, who clearly felt sympathy for Elizabeth, still placed their own ambitions above her right to the throne. We can only wonder what Robert thought of this decision later in life, when he had already become so deeply devoted to Elizabeth. Robert and his brothers were imprisoned in the Tower. They were held in Beauchamp Tower, where even today you can see the inscriptions they carved into the stone walls. Soon, Robert would have company in the Tower when Elizabeth was imprisoned on suspicion of supporting Wyatt's rebellion. This is why the scene in the film where Robert comforts her is not accurate. At that time, he himself was awaiting his fate behind bars. The fact that they were both prisoners later created many rumours of secret meetings, but this is unlikely. They were kept in different parts of the Tower. Elizabeth was placed in the same rooms where her mother had once awaited execution. It was a cruel reminder, and she lived under strict guard and constant suspicion. Both Robert and Elizabeth were lucky to leave the Tower alive, yet Elizabeth later said she thought she would never walk free again. On May 19th, 1554, the anniversary of her mother's death, she was released into house arrest. Robert was probably released from the Tower in October 1554, though his family was still viewed with suspicion. Yet the Tower would remain for both of them a shared point of reference that few others could truly understand. In Tudor England, the circle of people who had been imprisoned in the Tower and survived to tell the tale was very small. Both Robert and Elizabeth had lost loved ones to the executioner's axe in the same place. Robert's father and Elizabeth's mother rest forever under the stones of St. Peter ad Vincula. Even if they did not meet during their imprisonment, they had both looked death in the face. That kind of experience creates a powerful bond. After their release, they lived not far from each other. Elizabeth at Hatfield, Robert at Tring. It was likely then that some deeper feeling began to grow, along with more regular contact. There are reports that Robert even supported Elizabeth financially. Despite being the Queen's sister, she often struggled with money. Robert himself had been disinherited after his father's fall, but he still owned some of his mother's lands. He sold them to gain favour with Queen Mary's husband and to fund the military campaign at Calais. It is possible that part of the proceeds also went to Elizabeth. This explains why, the very moment Elizabeth became queen in 1558, Dudley rushed to her side, arriving dramatically on a white horse. One of her very first acts as queen was to appoint him Master of the Horse. By April 1559, just 5 months after her accession, rumours of their closeness were already circulating. Clearly something had begun during Mary's reign, even if we do not know exactly what. If they had been nothing more than childhood friends, it is unlikely he would have received such a prominent role at the new Queen's court. Everyone could see that Robert had a special place in Elizabeth's heart. They were both young, attractive, and lively. They shared a love of dancing, hunting, and horse riding, as well as the same sense of humour. The Queen showered Dudley with affection, calling him her bonny sweet Robin. In their letters she used his playful nickname Eyes, sometimes even marking it with Latin characters that looked like little eyes. Here is how their relationship was described in a letter to King Philip II, who, by the way, had once hoped to marry the sister of his late wife. Lord Robert has come so much into favour that he does whatever he likes with affairs, and it is even said that Her Majesty visits him in his chamber day and night. At this point, a naive viewer might ask, but Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen. So was she really a virgin? Tell me in the comments what you think. One answer could be that the definition of virgin has changed over time. In Tudor England, it often meant simply a maid, in other words, an unmarried woman. Another answer is that Elizabeth chose to declare herself a virgin, and her willpower made it so. Even on her deathbed during smallpox, she swore that, though she loved him dearly, nothing unseemly had ever passed between them. Yet the amount of evidence from contemporaries makes this hard to believe. Witnesses described public displays of touch, like when she made Robert an Earl on the 29th of September 1564 and openly tickled his neck. Their letters also contained unusually intimate phrases, and the fact that they lived in adjoining rooms, connected by a private passage, makes it rather naive to think nothing happened between them. But we all know that such passionate relationships often have consequences. Pregnancies and children. What about this side of the story? In 1561, Elizabeth was confined to her bed with a mysterious illness that caused her body to swell. Then, in 1587, on the coast of Spain, a young man was arrested on suspicion of spying. He introduced himself as Arthur Dudley and claimed to be the illegitimate son of Elizabeth and Robert Dudley. His age even matched the date of Elizabeth's strange illness in 1561. Of course, this story was most likely Spanish propaganda. The Spanish had every reason to discredit Elizabeth. Modern historians agree that Elizabeth was so closely surrounded by courtiers and lived under such constant observation that it would have been nearly impossible for her to be pregnant, let alone give birth without anyone noticing. No matter how close and in love the Queen and her favourite may have been, one fact never changed. Robert was a married man. While he ruled the court and built a reputation as one of the most hated men in England, his wife Amy lived a very different life far away in the countryside. Everything changed on the 8th of September, 1560. Amy Robsart was found dead at the foot of a staircase with a broken neck. She was only 28. Rumours spread quickly. Many whispered that her death was no accident, and that Robert had cleared his way to the Queen's hand. Most modern historians see murder as unlikely. Robert himself demanded an inquiry, unlike Mary Stuart, who refused an investigation after the suspicious death of her second husband. which only increased suspicion. There are theories that Amy may have been ill with cancer and either fell by accident or chose to end her suffering. That day, she had even insisted that her servants leave the house for the fair, so she could be alone. Others suggest that Amy's death may have been staged not by Robert, but by those who wished to stop his marriage to Elizabeth. Such a union would have been a scandal. Elizabeth, though young, was already a sharp ruler, and understood that a marriage clouded by gossip could cost her the throne. There was another problem. Robert's rank was beneath her. Her father Henry VIII could take English wives. But for Elizabeth, the standards were different. A queen's husband was expected to rule over her, and any man she married would gain direct influence over the politics of England. Elizabeth had tasted power, and she had no desire to share it. Some argue she also feared the dangers of childbirth. She had seen Catherine Parr's fate and knew how deadly pregnancy could be in Tudor England. Still, she never cut Robert off completely. She played a game, offering hope and then taking it away, just as she entertained the proposals of foreign suitors at her court. Why do you think Elizabeth never married, not even Robert Dudley? Was it wisdom, fear, or something else entirely? Robert still desperately hoped to become Elizabeth's husband. Even after she suggested him in 1563 as a possible match for Mary Stuart, he resisted the idea. If his only goal had been to marry a queen, it would have been a good opportunity. Instead, Robert found himself in a delicate position. The queen's favourite, tied to her jealousy, but never allowed true freedom. He described it himself. "I stand on the top of the hill, where the smallest slip seemeth a fall." By the end of 1569, Robert entered a relationship with the young widow Douglas Sheffield. They even had an illegitimate son together, also named Robert Dudley. Later, Douglas claimed it had not been just an affair, but a secret marriage, though this was likely her attempt to secure inheritance rights for her son. This is the kind of story that should have been shown in films about Elizabeth. The Queen's favourite with a hidden child, instead of invented conspiracies. In 1575, Robert made one last attempt to win Elizabeth's hand. At his castle of Kenilworth, he organised a magnificent festival in her honour. He had a special Leicester's building and gardens constructed just for the Queen. The celebration lasted 19 days with masks, feasts and fireworks. On the final night, a great spectacle was planned, which many believe was meant as his proposal of marriage. But heavy rain ended the event and Elizabeth left the estate. This became known as the most extravagant festival of her reign. It was reported across Europe and immortalised in countless pamphlets. The storm also extinguished Robert Dudley's final hopes. Realising that he would never be the Queen's husband, but knowing his family line needed an heir, Robert married in 1578. His bride was Lettice Knollys, Elizabeth's striking red-haired cousin, who also happened to look very much like the Queen. Curious, isn't it? Centuries pass, and yet men still choose women who resemble their first great love. When Elizabeth learned of the marriage, she was furious. She banned Lettice from court, calling her a she-wolf before foreign ambassadors, and labelling Robert himself a traitor and a cuckold. Robert, now out of favour, lamented in a letter, "She, the Queen, does take every occasion by my marriage to withdraw any good from me." Over time, Elizabeth's anger cooled. Robert's marriage proved a happy one, and the long romance between the Queen and her favourite slowly transformed into friendship. Ironically, the role of Elizabeth's new sweet Robin passed to another Robert, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, who was Lettice's son and Robert Dudley's stepson. Dudley's career was not over. He was appointed Governor-General of the Netherlands and later played a vital role during the Spanish Armada in 1588. It was he who urged Elizabeth to appear before her troops at Tilbury, and he stood by her side during that famous speech. Afterwards, he returned triumphantly to London and dined with the Queen in celebration. Less than a month later, exhausted and likely suffering from stomach cancer, Robert Dudley died at the age of about 55. Elizabeth was devastated. Grieving for her brother and best friend, she locked herself in her rooms and refused to see anyone until Lord Burghley forced the door. Just days before his death, Robert had written her a letter asking after her health. and ending with a kiss upon her foot. Elizabeth kept it close, writing on it his last letter. She treasured it in a casket beside her bed until her own death in 1603. As for Lettice, the other woman, perhaps she had the last laugh. She remarried, lived to the age of 91, and ensured she was buried beside Dudley under an epitaph calling him the best and most beloved of husbands. Was this her quiet triumph over the Queen? The story of Elizabeth and Robert Dudley, though still wrapped in mystery, is filled with turbulence, scandals, highs and lows. Yet to me, one thing is clear. One way or another, he was a special person in Elizabeth's life. As Queen Victoria once said of her husband Albert, that he was the only one equal to her, the only one she could call you. Perhaps, for Elizabeth, that person was Robert, the man who, in one form or another, walked beside her from a little princess of 8 years old to one of the greatest monarchs of her time. What do you think? Was this a love story or a toxic bond that lasted a lifetime? Share your thoughts in the comments and see you in the next video.